Assalamu alaikum. And it is afternoon in Dhaka, so good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good
Welcome
evening.
to welcome to a Brain Bangladesh Research Analysis and Information Network conversation with Mr. Faisal Mahmud. Faisal is I will tell you that Faisal is joining the Bangladesh mission in New Delhi as a diplomat. But maybe Faisal, you can tell us a bit more about yourself and what you would be doing in Delhi, and then we can take the conversation from there.
Thank you, Jyoti Bhai, for having me in your show. So yes, as you mentioned, I'll be joining as the Press Minister of Bangladesh High Commission in New Delhi. The position of Press Minister, Bangladesh has 57 embassies across the world, but only three embassies or high commissions have this position of Press Minister, because those three embassies or high commission has the importance of bilateral relationship and letting out the information about Bangladesh out to their own medias in those countries. So yes, New Delhi is one of those missions, and there is this other missions in London and Washington DC, and I'm going to be posted in New Delhi. I have been a journalist for the past 15 years, and I have worked in four national newspapers. And from 2016, I have been covering Bangladesh for global outlets like Al Jazeera, Nikkei Asia. Okay, so as I was saying, I have been covering Bangladesh for several international news outlets like Al Jazeera, Nikkei Asia, and I've also written in outlets like Voice of America, Asia Times, and various other places. And the government, the interim government which came to power after ousting of Hasina back in August 5th, they offered me this position of press minister in New Delhi back in late October, and I've accepted that because I thought it's going to be a challenging responsibility, because the amount of misinformation and disinformation that is coming out from India, I feel like that it's going to be a challenging role.
Right. So sort of thanks for that introduction. And challenging, yes, that would be the word. So let's get straight into it. Information, disinformation, misinformation. Paint a picture for us. We have heard of these allegations from our side. They, of course, claim that that's not the case. That they are portraying things in Bangladesh as they are. What exactly are we talking about?
You see, you mentioned disinformation and misinformation, and I think you also mentioned information as well, right? So yeah, all sorts of things are coming out from the Indian media. But then again, we have to understand the dynamics of Indian media first. If you take a look at the Indian media and Indian press freedom, you'll find out that they're not in a good shape. I think in the last Freedom of Press Index, which was published back in 2023, I'm not sure about the 2024 one, India was in number 161 position out of 180. So there is a gradual deterioration of their own media. There are lots of legacy medias which used to do great stories back in the 90s and early 2000s, like India Today, and they have downgraded themselves to a propaganda machine. And yes, the Indian media has this tendency of looking at Bangladesh through their own lenses, and that lenses is primarily, I believe it's primarily about security lenses, because the main concern that the New Delhi has about Bangladesh is their security of the 7 eastern states which are at the right side of Bangladesh, and it is being connected with India through a very narrow corridor. So successive Indian administration always look at Bangladesh through the security prisms. And the last government that was in power, Sheikh Hasina government, which came to power, which was in power for 4 consecutive terms out of 3. They came to power through three very controversial elections, right? So, but they were in power for 15 consecutive years. And during those years, one thing that the last government did was, they have sort of like eradicated this fear from South Bloc that the eastern states will not create, a big sort of anarchy using Bangladeshi land for them. That's why, the New Delhi was pretty happy. But after August 5th, what happened? They're seeing this whole security situation again through their own convoluted lenses, and they believe that there is a rise of Islamism in Bangladesh, number one, and Bangladesh might become a very ultra right-wing or fundamentalist state, which will create a major security concern for them. And that's why they are manufacturing all those, disinformation or misinformation about minorities, the situation of minorities in Bangladesh. Let me explain. I'm not saying that the minorities are not concerned about their situation in Bangladesh right now. There is a concern. There were some attacks after August 5th, obviously. We cannot deny that. But if you look at the nature of or the state of those attacks, you'll find that those attacks were not conducted because of the communal reasons, right? I can give a reference. Netro News did a very comprehensive stories categorically debunking that those attacks had happened because of political reasons. But then again, Indian media probably they were trying to amplifying this whole scenario and trying to put these attacks on minorities and making it a center point and try to amplify it to set out their own agenda. They want to portray Bangladesh as a state which has plunged into a chaos and which has turned into, as I say, which has turned into a fundamentalist state, so that they can keep the whole, keep the interim government of Bangladesh under a severe pressure from the Western partners and other countries as well. And I think they were primarily doing that because of their own, as I said, their own fear and convoluted sense of seeing Bangladesh only through the security lenses. And Indian media, they're just acting like a cheerleader for this purpose. They are not verifying their informations that they're getting. They are putting out their own propaganda and all those misinformation. Yes.
All right. Okay. So there are multiple threads there that I want to unpick. Okay. So in no particular order, we talked. You said that sort of Indian media landscape or press freedom, media freedom in India has declined, deteriorated over the last several years, decade. And I looked at some of this stuff. You might remember we were drafting an article actually before the July uprising, comparing Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan sort of state of democracy. And I was quite shocked, saddened, in fact, to see that, sort of according to these international indices, that, sort of India had been, we knew that Bangladesh had been in very bad shape for at least a decade, 15 years, right, under Hasina regime. We knew that Pakistan had always been problematic. It was sad to see that India had also declined. So that's one thing that the legacy media such as India Today, which sort of growing up in the 80s and 90s, we would look back, look at those Indian magazines and think that, okay, if only we had magazines of sort of that caliber. And it's sad to see that these magazines actually become nothing more than tabloid, propaganda pieces. Is that the case for all of Indian media, though, or are there still some genuinely journalistically, credible outlets? Do you make?
Yes, Jyoti bhai, India, as I said, there are these mainstream media houses, both in print and broadcast platforms, and there are some independent platforms which I think have been doing brilliant works in the past few years. I can give you the names. The Wire, Scroll, News Minutes, Quint. These are all independent medias, and they're not being backed by large corporations. They have their own funding methods. They even crowdsource their funds. They are doing some great jobs, and they are also facing the ire of their own government. The Modi government is not very happy with their coverage. But again, even in terms of legacy media, I think if you talk about the Hindu, I think Hindu has always been giving balanced coverage. But again, about Bangladesh, as I mentioned, they're accustomed to see Bangladesh through their security lenses, and that's why even papers like Hindu, they also subscribe to the narrative that their government probably wants to propagate. But then again, in terms of putting out stories which will objectively look at things, I think India is way ahead of Bangladesh as of this moment, because Bangladesh truly doesn't have an independent media. All media houses. It's very funny because after fall of Sheikh Hasina, you'll see that almost all the media houses, like the TV stations, they're broadcasting newses which they should have broadcasted a few years ago when Hasina was in power. So there is this tendency of succumbing to the power, whoever is in power. But India, yeah, I think again, though India is not doing good in the freedom of press index, but I think the overall condition of independent media is way better than Bangladesh.
Okay, all right. So we'll come back to that topic in a while, because we would also want to understand what it is that the press minister actually does, what you would expect to do and all of that, and how you want to, sort of handle the issue or resolve the issue. We'll come back to that. Hold on to that thought. Two other things you mentioned. One is that the Indian, for the lack of any better word, if I could say, Indian establishment. So sort of India's foreign policy bureaucracy. It's it's opinion makers looking at Bangladesh through their security lens. So that's one thing. And the other issue, which is related but somewhat different, which is the minority issue, right? So let's unpack those two things slightly. So the minority issue obviously harkens back to pre-partition days, right? Yes. And in our side of the subcontinent, as opposed to on the other side of the subcontinent, where partition was accompanied by sort of exchange of population. So sort of Pakistan has very few non-Muslims, like Punjab. Pakistani Punjab, sort of the non-Muslims emigrated out of that, and Indian Punjab lost all the Muslims. There was a exchange of population and done deal. In our side of the subcontinent, it's not, it was that, fortunately was not the case, but unfortunately that also means that there has been lingering, communal tensions, communal issues on both sides of the border, right? And this is nothing new, and this is, this has happened sadly for Bangladesh, that there has been issues with minorities, attacks on their land, attacks on their sort of for encroachment of their rights, keeping in mind that for 15 years no Bangladeshi had much political or civil rights to begin with. But even so, even under the Awami League regime, Hasina regime, there were actually recorded persecutions and events. So given that reality, why do you think the Indian media had, or why do you think these issues came to fore after 5th of August, when when incidents happened? So, for example, in 2021 during the Durga Puja, there were attacks on, concerted attacks on temples and puja, events across the country, right? So.
Yes, Jyoti bhai, you rightly pointed it out. I mean, first, let's address this elephant in the room. I mean, subcontinent is probably the only place in the world, except I think Ireland, where demarcation of border was being done based on religion, right? If I'm not wrong, I believe that's the only place. I mean, the largest partition of borders based on.
Balkans as well, right?
Yes, okay, but again, the largest, as I mentioned, largest. Okay, so I mean, yes, there are some issues with minorities, majorities, Hindu, Muslim in subcontinent. We have to address that. But again, it's about comparison. Like, what are the condition of minorities in Bangladesh? What are the condition of minorities in India? This is the question that we should address. I mean, I'm not saying that the condition of minorities in Bangladesh is way better than the minorities, the condition of minorities in India. Let's address that later. But the main problem is, in Bangladesh, as I mentioned earlier, South Bloc or New Delhi has always been looking at Bangladesh through the security prisms. So in the last 15 years, that particular concern was, I would say, well addressed by Sheikh Hasina government. That's why they were not bothered about attacks on minorities. I mean, I have covered incidents like what happened in Nasim Nagar, and I stayed there for 3 long days, and I tried to find out what really happened, and I found some very interesting things. Anyway, but then again, as they were not that concerned about their securities, they overlooked those attacks on minorities and didn't make it a big issue out of those attacks. But after August 5th, what really happened, because they have put their ante on Hasina government instead of people of Bangladesh for a long period. And all of a sudden, this fall of Hasina regime has thrown them into an uncharted territories, right? So that's why, and I mean, the Indian media, they sort of have started acting on their own accord. I'm not saying that the Indian government told the media to, okay, propagate this news for us. No, I'm not saying that. I would rather say that the Indian administration or the executive branch has been acting very responsibly. But Indian media has started acting on their own records primarily for two reasons. Because they have this tendency of catering to their own audiences, which it's not about Indian audience only. I mean, audiences across the world has been a sucker for all these, clickbait newses and the news, sensationalized newses. And attacks on Hindus after August 5th has sort of become this sensationalized cannon fodder for Indian media, and they have amplified those and try to propagate and try to add their own twists and try to propagate those. And they are well received by the Indian audience. So the first they did that because primarily to cater to their own audiences. And then they did that because they have, as I said, the whole situation thrown them into an uncharted territories. They were not that accustomed to getting all these information and newses from Bangladesh. Because to be honest, Indian media has never given due or proper importance to what really were happening in Bangladesh in the last 15 years. Whenever anything important happened in India, in Bangladesh, we used to give them prominent coverage in our front pages and prime times. But Indian media never did that. So that's why after August 5th, they have found this way of giving these convoluted coverages on Bangladesh, and they have been doing so. That's my observation.
So that's interesting because so one thing is that obviously there is an information mismatch that sort of we understand India a lot more than Indians understand Bangladesh. I mean,
That's true. I have to agree with you on that.
yes. And part of that is again there are historical reasons for that. Like Calcutta was the preeminent cultural capital in our part of the world for much of 20th century, and there is still that hang up there, right? 75 years after partition, sort of the Bangla literature and all of that. There is that element, but also I'm reminded about how prominent Indian officials in the old Congress government, and so for example, Kaushik Basu, right, a very well-respected economist, was World Bank chief economist at one point. Before that, he was Manmohan Singh. When he was the prime minister, he was Manmohan Singh's chief economic advisor, right, and a Bengali. So he wrote about Bangladesh back in, I think, 2016 or 2017, right? And he talked about all the good things that were happening in Bangladesh, not just under Hasina regime, but since the 70s, that the Bangladesh miracle, Bangladesh sort of all of that sort of that. Amartya Sen also wrote about those things.
Yes.
The real development narrative in Bangladesh, not embellished by Hasina, because in 2016-17, Hasina had not been in power for a decade yet. So so he was giving due credit to things such as sort of the old BNP government's focus on female education and all of those, right? And then he ended his piece warning that how things could go wrong in Bangladesh. And he didn't say anything about the loss of democracy or the debt-fueled infrastructure boom, the things that were actually going wrong in Bangladesh at that time. He talked about rise of fundamentalism. He talked about Bangladesh becoming another Pakistan or Afghanistan, where sort of women's rights are curtailed, where education is downplayed, militancy, and all of those things. Which is, it was quite surreal reading an economic piece by a preeminent, economist, saying that, okay, look, this is not actually what is happening in Bangladesh. In 2016-17 Bangladesh, if you were worried about things that could go wrong, it's not fundamentalism, it's not rise of extremism that you should have been worried about. You should have been worried about, an unelected government, sort of rise of oligarchy, banks being plundered, debt-fueled infrastructure, those kind of things, which
Right.
is, basically what we now know has gone wrong in Bangladesh, right? So, and sort of So yeah, so Indians
I mean,
definitely didn't understand Bangladesh. Yeah.
I mean, it circles back to that observation. I mean, Indian media, as I said, they didn't give due importance or due coverage to what really happened in Bangladesh. Because whenever any, I mean, what sort of coverage they used to give? Whenever any bilateral visit happened from Indian side or from Bangladesh side, they used to give coverage. Whenever any attacks or anything related with the minorities, I mean the Hindus had happened in Bangladesh, they used to give coverage. So whenever you look, I mean, suppose you just type that India-Bangladesh relation, India-Bangladesh economic relation in Google, the articles that come up on the top will give you that sort of convoluted ideas. I mean, as I mentioned, because the Indian media didn't give due coverage. And in Bangladesh, we were not amplifying I mean, obviously we didn't have the scope because very autocratic, autocratic is a very soft word for what Hasina government was, but I'm still going to use it. A very autocratic government was in power, right? And they were trying to, I mean, they were not, I mean, under them, the media that we had in Bangladesh, I mean, all those media, the broadcast media and print newspapers, except few, I'm not going to name them, but except few newspapers try to portray what really happened. But all the medias, they were portraying all sorts of developments from Bangladesh. You know, Bangladesh has made this sort of GDP growth, builds this large infrastructure, but they didn't mention how much corruption had happened or plundering of money had happened in those infrastructure projects. But they mentioned the infrastructure works were going on. And, you know, all this information give, obviously, you mentioned about Amartya Sen, Kaushik Bose, they are, I mean, you're an economist and they are like doyens of the economics. They have great sense, but they're very busy people. Whenever they talk, whenever they want to write an op-ed or article about Bangladesh, they usually try to do this Google searches, maybe, I don't know, these, well, I don't know, maybe, I'm not saying that they wrote those articles basing on those information. But if that didn't happen, that is even more, that is even issue of more concern, because I'm not sure whether they were propagating those information on behalf of the previous government, but that's something that I am not going to claim. But then again, the real situation, the erosion of democracy and the rigging of 3 elections, I mean, it's very bad rigging of 3 elections. In one election, you know, they're pejoratively called midnight election. I don't know whether in any part of the world there is a thing called midnight election. And so they were not concerned about that. And that what's really, you know, create this situation which had led us to August 5th. I mean, a massive uprising which within just a span of 3 weeks toppled a very powerful government. I mean, because it all added up to it, right? I mean, if those coverages, those proper coverages where you would actually would have found the truth did happen back in those days, I would say that this uprising might not have happened.
Now let me circle back to the Indian security concerns, and let me put it. So let me put it to you this way, right? Okay, so Indian establishment, Indian foreign policy and national security establishment, they were, from their perspective, they were concerned about their territorial integrity in the Indian northeastern 7 sister states. India has faced insurgencies all around the country over its history. And this had been, sort of the geography there is very tricky for them. We just look at the map, you know that it's tricky, right? Yes. So, and then Hasina comes along, basically says that, look, this is not going to be a problem for you anymore. They said, fantastic. It was something that was working for Hasina in the sense that, sort of she was supported by Indian establishment in doing her things. Indian establishment was happy that, okay, look, Hasina is looking after all of that. We don't have to worry about this. This was a nice, cozy arrangement for both of them until it blew up. Now that it has blown up, completely, why is it that why is it that the Modi government, so this is a colossal failure yes. of Modi government's foreign policy or national security policy, right? I mean, just imagine that if tomorrow, the Trump government says, or Trump administration says that, look, we're going to build a wall or whatever, right? And 10 years later, that hasn't happened, and the policy has blown up. It's similar to that. So the whole Modi government's Bangladesh policy has been a failure. Why is it that Indian media is not picking up that?
Right, very good question. I mean, Jyoti bhai, if I'm not wrong, even during the time of the Congress, they were essentially subscribing to what we used to know as IK Gujral doctrine, right? I mean, Inder Kumar Gujral doctrine put emphasis on building good relationship with the neighbors. And I mean, they used to have this mutual respect with, I'm not saying that India has always given Bangladesh its due respect. It's probably the opposite. But then again, at least there are some mutual respect with each other. But I think Modi has its own doctrine, and he was very specific about that. He has this ambition of making India, a true global superpower. And India probably has the potential to do that. It has the largest population. It has a very stable and increasing middle class, which is highly educated, and that middle class is spreading everywhere in the world, in the Western countries, and in world financial and tech capital. So they probably have this capacity. But personally, it feels like, I'm not saying this as my official capacity, just as an observer. I think they're putting what's the horse before the cart, I would say. I mean, or cart before the horse. Which was I forgot which is the proverb. But then again, you understand the point. Because, they have the responsibility of eradicating their own poverty. I mean, India has the largest number of poor people. And they still have states like Bihar, Jharkhand, and other places where problems of, communal violence and others are very rampant. And instead of addressing their own domestic issues, they have these global ambitions, and they are, and by having this global ambition, they are making their relationships with all the neighbors very bad. If you look at Sri Lanka, Pakistan is not the case. I mean, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives, and now Bangladesh. I mean, they are all angry with what Indian establishment have been doing with them, and they increasingly have this, I wouldn't use the word hostile, but not friendly government towards New Delhi. And that's definitely a policy failure of India, because India needs to do some soul searching and find out like why all of a sudden the countries in the neighborhood have become very hostile towards us. So again, Indian media is not picking up on that. Probably it's not entirely true, because I have seen articles from very sensible people. I mean, as I said, like in the Wire or in global media outlets like Nikkei Asia has been consistently publishing stories where foreign policy analysts are saying Modi has been making some mistakes by not prioritizing their neighborhoods. So I've seen these articles, but again, Indian broadcast media and some of the mainstream newspapers are probably not publishing any news on that line. But because they have, as you know, that they have become Godi media. There is a very
So and you may or may not want to comment on this, but I'll, in your official capacity, but I'm not. So I'll just put it out there that India is always having elections. It's still a democracy.
Yes.
25, 26 states. So basically, every few months, some state has an election. So that probably plays a role in all of this, and which to me actually makes the puzzle even worse, because Rahul Gandhi talked about Adani before before the Indian election earlier in 2024, before the Bangladesh election, in fact. Yeah. So sometime in 2023, where he basically linked Hasina with Adani and corruption and Modi in Indian parliament. Right. Yes. So he actually said that, Modi ji went to Dhaka and Adani got a contract from Hasina. Yes, and we know that the contract was ridiculously one-sided. Bangladesh bears all the risks and have to pay large amount of money, even if, we don't get any electricity and any of that, right? Extremely one-sided contract. So Rahul Gandhi talked about that when Hasina was in power, Modi was in power before the elections. Yes. But Congress hasn't been making much noise about it since. To me, that seems like a big. Rather that they're talking up their personal relationship with Hasina that the Gandhi family had enjoyed. So this is, to me, this seems like a pretty weird, strange thing, right?
Yes, you'd have found Rahul Gandhi making also. I mean, he vehemently criticized Modi on a lot of issues, including that Adani power plant, which is obviously a very controversial power plant. But then again, after August 5th, if you look at the tone of Congress as well as Rahul Gandhi, you see that they were almost speaking in the same tune with the BJP government about Bangladesh issues. I mean, they were not that deviant from what the BJP wanted to propagate. Because as I mentioned earlier, that in terms of looking at Bangladesh through their security prisms, both Congress and BJP are on the same page. I don't think, and they probably are rightfully on the same page because they have this concern. But what I want to say as an observer, not as a diplomat or at my official capacity, they need to change their policy and probably need to go back to that IK Gujral doctrine and fix their neighborhood first. Because if they have a hostile neighborhood, their ambition of becoming a global superpower might falter. That's my observation.
Sure. Okay. Now, bringing it
Jyoti,
to
one thing you asked me
yeah.
earlier that what is the responsibility of a press minister, right? So
Yes.
let me,
I was just going to say that, like, what you would be doing and
right.
how you would be addressing, these challenges that you are going to.
Exactly. So let me first make a confession because I have been a journalist for more than 14 years, nearly 15 years, and this is an uncharted territory for me because I have never I've never worked for the government for any government. So this is as I said, like a new uncharted territory for me. But I know what my responsibility will be because I have talked with people who have these experiences. So I think my primary responsibility will be to handle Indian press or Indian media and put forward Bangladesh issues in front of them. I mean, what is really happening in Bangladesh, and try to put out those information into the Indian press. That will be my first responsibility. And number two is I have to attend press briefing. I'm not attend press briefings. I have to keep a constant contact with the external affairs ministries in New Delhi and try to understand their foreign policies towards Bangladesh and their all sorts of policies towards Bangladesh. I think so. These two will be my primary responsibilities. But then again, this is not exactly a regular time. As I mentioned, these two would have been responsibilities of a regular time. But I'm saying that the current situation that we have between the two countries is probably not exactly qualify as a normal situation. So I think my responsibility will be increased in that sense. I have to actively fight this massive disinformation drive of this Indian media with proper facts and truths. And to do that, I think I would need a gamut of things, fact checking, and then actively putting out articles into the global media, not only in Indian media or in local Bangladeshi media, in global media about the exact situation in Bangladesh. So these are the added responsibilities under the current circumstances, which to my understanding.
And actively putting out, do you mean that by yourself or through your network? And like, which is where something like, for example, Brain, by virtue of being a network.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I can, since I have taken up this new position, I will not be able to do reporting, which was my profession. I used to be a reporter. Then I later became an editor, but for a short period. But I used to be a reporter. I will not be able to do any reporting because that doesn't, it creates a conflict of interest. But I will be able to write op-eds, as I have confirmed. So I probably will write those op-eds by myself because I have these contacts with global medias, a number of them. But then again, I will need a pool of writers, pool of researchers to do these all sorts of reporting and op-ed writing so that the truths get out there. I'm not saying that we will, I will actively engage in putting out propagandas. I just want to put out the truths out there because that will cancel out and nullify all sorts of disinformation without my effort. So that's why, yeah.
And like, so one thing, not just with respect to India, but more broadly, one thing that we discovered, we, the present company, you and I, but also our colleagues and allies and comrades during the July uprising
Yes.
is that the content on Bangladesh in English is few and far between, right?
Yes.
Sort of,
Unfortunately, yes.
Traditionally, we had not had many good English writers. That was the case even before Hasina. And then for the past decade, 15 years, the space for, safe space for speaking your voice was very limited,
Yes.
right? So that is something that, sort of we need to do better as a people, as a country anyway. And India is, sort of obviously the most urgent, sort of the theater of that work. What about social media? And sort of this is the age of social media, new technology. Disinformation is, right there.
Yes, I mean, Bangladesh is very active on Facebook. We are a Facebook nation. I remember Rest of World, which is a very respected and good media, which do stories on tech. They did a story where they term Bangladesh as a Facebook nation, and it's true. We are probably one of the largest consumer of Facebook and user of Facebook. But then again, if you want to fight India against the disinformation drive, I'm not using the word campaign. I'm just using the word drive. You have to be on X or Twitter, because Twitter has this global appeal which Facebook probably doesn't have, and there's this other media which is probably the biggest in India, which is WhatsApp. Indian people, especially,
right?
no, I mean not necessarily close group. India, I have there's this article, I forgot which, probably the Wired magazine. They published that the most of Indian people, especially in the hinterland, in states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, they don't read newspapers. They don't see even newses from YouTube or I would say TV channels. They only get news as what their WhatsApp groups or WhatsApp channels are showing to them, and they get these newses from WhatsApp, and there's been thousands of memes on that. So I mean, I'm not sure, I'm not entirely sure how to penetrate into those WhatsApp groups. As you mentioned, most of them are closed, and it's not easy for anyone to penetrate in those WhatsApp groups and try to put out your own newses out there. But if we're not being able to do that, I think the misinformation drive in a huge part of India will keep propagating. So I haven't started I started working in my station, which is in New Delhi yet. I'll probably go in the first or second week of January. But I have this strategy in my mind, like how to counter all this disinformation drive from India. So first of all, we need to do our own research well. I think the Chief Advisor's Office has started a CA fact check wing, and the Press Institute of Bangladesh is also going to start a fact check wing, which will be very helpful. Now we have at least 2 reputed organizations which checks disinformation on their own accord, and they're being properly funded, so they do some very good jobs, like Dismiss Lab. So we have these fact checking organizations in our arsenal from where we can take the help. So number one, finding facts and categorically writing those and establishing proper communication with those facts is of paramount importance. That's number one. Number two is we need to do some search engine optimization, because like if a person in United States writes India Bangladesh Hindu problem in Google, the articles that will come on the first page will always be from the Indian media. So we need to make sure that the articles that we put out in the global media or in the Bangladeshi media or in other medias will come at the first page. So we need to do some search engine optimization, and we need to do that constantly, because it's not a static thing. And then again, we need to be very active on X. We need to find out people who can write proper fact-based, because X has these word limitations if you don't subscribe to X's. So we need to find out people who can write out these small tweets, meaningful tweets. And then again, my the last thing that I want to do is probably that I mentioned earlier, that penetrating into those WhatsApp group. I'm not sure about how to do that, but I'm finding out ways. So these are the 4 things that I'll probably do when I go to my station. Like, these are the primary things that I will going to do. But I have other plans in my mind which are far-fetched, which I'll share with you later.
Sure. Although, this sounds fascinating in the sense that I think I'll go out of my I'll just put it out there that, I don't think any of your predecessors, and this is no disrespect to esteemed people who may have held a position, would have even thought about, sort of these, sort of fact checks and sort of Twitter, X and search engine optimization and any of this stuff. But again, sort of this is not the normal thing, right?
Unprecedented times call for unprecedented actions. I can say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's going to be fascinating because events back home will play out as they do, and they may help you in your mission, but they may also throw up spanners, right? I mean, we are a nation in flux. Sort of the when a vicious regime, a despotic regime falls, things are rarely smooth, right? So the post-Hasina transition in Bangladesh, we're still going through that. I would personally argue that it has actually been far smoother than one might have expected in the first week of August. But
Jyoti, I think you are one of the very few public intellectuals who have been saying that the transition from post-August period has been very smooth, and which is probably true. I'm not saying this as a part of the government. I'm saying this as an observer. Because if you look at the numbers of, what is the benchmark of finding out the transition was smooth? First, the number of casualties, because we had a revolutionary scale uprising, right? And the number of casualties after August 5th, again, any death is condemned. I mean, I condemn any death. I condemn any violence. But the number of casualties was, I would say, lower than than people's anticipation. And you are an economist, and you can explain it better. But I think the economy is probably going towards the right direction from the very, very bad shape that Hasina government put us in, right? I mean, I think it's probably going towards the right direction. If you look at the indexes and numbers, I think it's probably going towards the right direction. So yes, I mean, again, our freedom of expression was severely curtailed for 15 years. We couldn't express what we wanted to express. Our voting rights were curtailed. We couldn't vote, and we couldn't select our own leaders who would form the government. So I mean, so all of a sudden, after August 5th, it feels like that soda, or I mean, a bottle of soda, you pop up the cork of the soda, and it's like, so there is you will see all sorts of protests and everything. And I'm not saying that these are bad, because you know what, and the interim government is also accommodating all these protesters and voices. They are not using their polices to charge baton on those protesters. They're hearing. They're trying to correcting their own mistakes. But then again, I mean, there's this, you will find all sorts of issues, whether the interim government, when they will declare election, because an unelected government cannot stay in power for long, because we had a very bad experience back in 2008. You'll find all these debates. But I mean, I would say that these debates and these talks and these protests are not bad.
And that's also probably a story that you would want to, I would imagine that this is also a story that you'd want to highlight, tell the Indians.
Exactly. I already did that. But before my appointment, I did few stories in Indian media. I can give an example. I did a story in Scroll, which again is one of my favorite media, because they put out truths. They talk about truths, and they don't talk about misinformation. Sorry, I mean, they don't propagate misinformation. So I did a story, because you remember there was this incident of holding death anniversary of Muhammad Ali Jinnah in Dhaka University.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And there is this incident of there's the incident of installing a nameplate of felony on the roads where Indian High Commission is situated in Dhaka. So I juxtaposed those two situations and try to tell the Indian audience that it doesn't mean Bangladesh had become pro-Pakistan and anti-India. These are just the things that a group of people did because on their own accords. The government or the general population of Bangladesh had nothing to do with it, and it's fine, because a small group of people.
In a city of 20 million people.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and if you talk about.
I mean, what are you going to do, right?
Right, and if you talk about the actions from the interim government, whenever this group of people try to install that nameplate on the roads of Indian High Commission, they sort of, non-violently deterred those groups. Jyoti, you're hearing to me? You listen to me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
okay,
yes.
okay, okay, great.
Yeah.
So the police forces non-violently deterred that group. So because that was their responsibility, right? So I think the message that I tried to give is that okay, things are not that bad like the way you are portraying. It's fine. It can happen, and it can happen. I'm not saying that it will continue to happen, but things like this can happen. So that was my main message. Yeah.
So, looking at the time, and we could talk about this for a few
Right,
more
right,
hours,
yeah,
but we should
yeah.
probably wrap up. So, just a couple of other things. One on your official note and one on personal note. So, on the official one, you talked about, we talked about various strategies. How about a very old-fashioned strategy of getting people to come to Dhaka? So, right in the first week of August, when Hasina fled, I did an interview with with an Australian journalist from my hometown, actually.
Yes.
But she was based in India,
Yeah.
and she was waiting for visa, and actually was quite stressed. She really wanted to get to Dhaka.
Yes.
Fortunately, she did end up going to Dhaka, but at that time it was very stressful because first
Right.
week of August, no one knew what was going to happen, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, sort of is part of is there a strategy?
You have a
Yes.
plan.
I mean,
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely come to Dhaka.
in my official capacity, I have to look at whether I can facilitate a budget for the Indian journalists to come to Dhaka and do some reporting on the ground. I'm not sure at this point because I have to go to the High Commission and find out what sort of budget do I have. But I think in terms of getting visa of Bangladesh, the CA office, the Press Secretary Shafiqul Alam Bhai consistently have been saying that they are facilitating. Back in Hasina era, foreign journalists didn't get visa on many occasions, but right now I can guarantee you that if any journalist want to come to Bangladesh for reporting purpose, he or she will get the visa. But about that, as you mentioned, facilitating reporting trips to Bangladesh for Indian media or Indian journalists, that I have to look at when I go to High Commission.
Right. Okay. So wrapping up on the personal note. So your tour of duty is 2 years. Is that
Yes.
roughly?
Yes.
Yeah. And you'll be covering the entire country. So there is not a separate office in Calcutta, or what is there? Press
Yeah.
and they'll say, yeah.
There is a deputy high commission in Calcutta, in Mumbai, and I think there is assistant high commission in Guwahati and Tripura, Agartala, which was attacked a few days ago.
But your remit is all of them, or just the main? Yeah.
I'm going to be the press minister of New Delhi High Commission. So one of my responsibilities will be to, conduct conduct official communication with the person who is his position in those deputy high commissions and in assistant high commissions. To my understanding, I'm not entirely sure right now. I have to go and
Sure.
check.
Okay. Because the other added thing here is that quite often the Bengali media in Kolkata has a whole different dynamics
Yes.
to the national
Anand
media.
Bazar.
And West Bengal is also going to hold its state election during your tour of duty.
Right. But yeah, the Deputy High Commission of Calcutta has appointed a first secretary of press. He's a very capable person. He used to work in Manavjivin newspaper. So I think he will be primarily looking after the presses from the West Bengal. But again, I have to coordinate with him as well.
Okay. All right. So the last one on the personal note, then, New Delhi is a fascinating city. It's got thousands of years of old culture, music, food. So
I'm looking forward to taste all those good foods of New Delhi. And in winter, they have this only winter they have this dessert which they sell out onto the streets. I forgot its name. It's probably this fluffy milky desserts. I saw that in the YouTube.
Okay. All right.
And I'm looking forward to taste that.
Sure. And I'm sure that with
Dolat Ki Chaat. I remember the name. Dolat Ki Chaat. It's called Dolat Ki Chaat.
Right. Okay. I must look that up. And also, I'm sure we could have a conversation sometime with Shafiqul Alam Bhai as well
Of course.
about the merits and demerits of biryani. And
I think Jyoti bhai, we had this conversation. It was not like an interview, so I mean we talked about all those things and we digresses a lot. I mean for the audiences, we should say that we had a conversation. We have to make it clear that, right? Yeah, right.
okay, so it's fascinating talking to you, and
Likewise.
we would take up your time again once you have settled down in New Delhi
Yes.
to talk about how things are
Yes.
going and so on, if you give us that time. But
Yes,
in the meantime, by the time the audience hears this, it will be 2025. So Happy New Year, and 2024 was a momentous year for us in Bangladesh. We pay respect to all the shaheeds, all the martyrs who sacrificed their life for bringing freedom.
Yes, happy New Year to you. Yes, thank you, Jyoti bhai. Yes.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Bye.